Downtown Los Angeles. This is the Postmortem Podcast, and it's a special event tonight. It's the 10th anniversary screening of Moon with director Duncan Jones and composer Clint Mansell, and we are here to celebrate this event. So Duncan, how did it come about? You come from a musical family, and you confess to not having much musical ability in your life.
It's untapped. I think that's the nice way to put it.
Okay.
As in, I have no musical ability. I've been working for a long time in commercials and doing music videos and things like that, knowing that eventually I wanted to do feature films, and had written something that I was hoping would be my first film, and sent it out to Sam Rockwell, who I was a big fan of, hoping that I might be able to get him interested in it. And he loved the idea of this film, but he wanted to play the lead instead of the part that I'd offered, which was this villain. So it wasn't actually Moon at all. It was for a film called Mute, which I ended up making
just
more
last
recently.
year it came out, right?
Yeah, so we met up to discuss that film, realized that wasn't going to work out, but I really, really enjoyed just talking to him and wanted to work with him. And after we discussed the kind of things that we might do together, this idea of a science fiction film that was kind of small in scope with a blue collar, kind of working guy as the lead, I said, look, let me get back to you. I'm going to try and write some ideas of what this film could be. And that was basically the genesis of Moon.
So it was an independent film, and it was your first film, and it's a movie star film as an independent film. So were you particularly a science fiction genre fan at the time? You wanted to do something scientific?
I was a sci-fi fan, yeah. And I think the way that film came together, because of Sam's interest and our shared interest in science fiction films from the late 70s, early 80s, the Outlands, Ridley Scott's Alien, right. Silent Running, those kind of movies, we wanted to make something that felt like that. And at the time we made this, which would have been, 2007, 2008, which is when we were putting it together, most science fiction that was coming out was not that kind of thing.
It was spaceship battles and things like that.
It was not grounded. It was not attempting to be what's called hard sci-fi. It was just a whole different feel. And I think we wanted to kind of see if we could kind of course correct, or at least give that option for the audience to see something which felt more like the things we grew up with.
Well, there's a symbiotic relationship between a director and a composer that's really important. We did one previous show with David Cronenberg and Howard Shore talking about their work on Dead Ringers and other films together. So, Quint, tell me about how this relationship began for the two of you. You were in a band, and then you started composing for Darren Aronofsky with Pi and several other of his films. So how did this relationship begin?
Well, I mean, to embarrass Duncan a little, this goes back a long way, his dad changed my life, without putting too fine a point on it.
For those who don't know, Duncan's father is David Bowie.
Yeah. I was like 8 years of age when I saw his dad on Top of the Pops, and I'm going like, it's difficult to appreciate now, but we live in a black and white world, and seeing his dad on Top of the Pops, the world went colour, technicolor, And I was like 8 years of age, something, and it changed my life, and I just go like, I don't even know what music is, but I love it, and I want to be that, And so I remember him being born, even though I didn't even know him, And unfortunately for him, he was like obviously thrust into being a celebrity before he was even able to speak, probably.
Even with a celebrity name of Zowie.
Yeah, but like, so what I'm saying about that is like, yeah, I started off on a journey that started with his dad, really, to wanting to be in a band, be a musician, and all that sort of stuff. And then years later, to meet Duncan and I'd sort of, I'd written songs and been in bands, and I'd got into film music. But then when we actually met at I was doing a gig with my band, and we met briefly at that show, you know, and then a couple of years later, I got a call from my agent saying like, "Oh, it's this script," and from somebody called Duncan Jones. I'm going like, "Oh God, I know who that is," you know.
We got drunk together.
We did, but that's why I don't remember
I don't drink
anything.
anymore. But back then I did.
I drink much more. But when I read the script, the script really for Moon is the script you dream of receiving, because it's still to this day probably the best script I've ever read. It's incredible, and Duncan's direction, Sam Rockwell, all that sort of stuff, you know. But it was as sort of convoluted as that sound. It was sort of kind of easy, really. The script comes in.
One thing that made it a little bit different, I think, is that because it was my first feature, and totally giving everyone the respect they're due, everyone was a bit concerned about wanting to know what it was going to be before they signed on to it, which I think was fair enough.
What was the vision? Yeah.
The guy had never made a film before, so you know, what are we going to get? What is it actually? I mean, it sounds good in principle, but what are we actually going to get? So when we were making the film and editing it, the temp was other people's music. It just so happened all of that music was Clint's music. It was Requiem for a Dream, it was The Fountain, it was basically just all of his stuff. So when we did actually show him the film, for him to kind of make his final,
I was
do
seduced.
It was Clint wall to wall, which I know is actually a lot of times harder.
It's harder, but for me, I could see, you know, you've just talked about films. Silent Running really being the main one for me, because I grew up with Silent Running was one of my favourite films, but everybody hated the Joan Baez songs in it. I loved the Joan Baez songs. Everybody's going like, "Oh, it sucks, that sucks," and I'm like, no, it's fucking genius, you know. And Duncan and the Moon thing got that. There was the emotion. I mean, and I say the script was brilliant. But the moment you see Sam Rockwell for a frame, you just go, okay.
Well, what's interesting about what you did with the score is that it's mostly atmospherics until the clone situation reveals itself. And then melody comes into play.
But the reality of it is, like, the composer's job is so easy when everything on screen is happening and I have nothing to do. I mean, because you're not... You know, Sam Rockwell is doing everything. He doesn't need any help from me or anybody else. The job's done. So you can join in where we need to sort of expand on something. That guy has just delivered everything. You know, I mean, like, my favourite quote of my own, in fairness, is, "It's easy to score a good film, it's impossible to score a shit one." I mean, and that's the truth.
Yeah.
You don't want to be doing the heavy lifting of making a scene work. Like by forcing emotion or forcing it to work a particular way with the music.
Well, what was your philosophy? What was your initial discussion with Quint about what you were going for? Obviously, you had a temp score in there, but I assume there were conversations before that.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think there was a certain seeing eye to eye on.
Yeah, there was, but the reality of it was what was delivered to me kind of didn't really need a lot of explaining. You could get it; it was there. You know.
So you didn't need long conversations about what
it was obvious of what was going on. I mean, it was clear, you know. And you know, I've worked on a lot of films. And often it is not clear. It's not there, you know. I mean, just because you make a film doesn't mean say it's going to work, you know. And this worked. Well, and it worked because the script and Duncan's vision was clear.
Well, there's a reason that directors work repeatedly with composers, the way that you two have worked together, the way you've worked with Darren Aronofsky, and all of that.
Yeah, you know, I got to be honest though, over the period of time that's occurred, I'm not sure that's actually a great thing. It's great because you have a shorthand, but I'm not sure because I think you know, obviously Duncan did Warcraft that I was not involved with, which is absolutely great. But I think that there's something about. I mean, I'm just doing my third film with Ben Wheatley, and I love Ben. But I think there's something about going off and exploring other things that is actually really kind of vital to what we do.
Yeah.
I don't think it's good just to assume you're going to be part of that.
And I think in our case, our very unique case, we have worked together twice. We kind of fiddled around with trying to work together more than that, but
Yeah.
two times we've actually done the jobs together, and I think both of us have changed so dramatically as people in those 10 years.
Yeah.
It was basically a new relationship and a new way of seeing how to make movies from 10 years ago to.
And I think that's important. You know, I say, I mean, Moon is really one of. If I had to look at my career and go like, okay, it's in the top 2 probably. You know, of films that I'm completely and utterly amazed that I was involved with and we did something with, because I believe it just works, and it works because it's good, you know. And I despair sometimes. I wonder if we could ever find that almost that magical place again where you can make a movie for $5 million and kind of have little interference, to be able to really express yourself. And it's a beautiful thing, you know. And I'm very, very happy that I was in part of it. Obviously, you had created that relationship with Sam, and it's so easy from a composer's point of view when like that guy on screen is just nailing it. I mean, it's just unbelievable. You know, there's always going to be scenes where a director might turn to you and say, like, I need a bit of help here.
Yeah.
I mean that's just the nature of the business, of course. But man,
and there's also discovery. I mean, there's discovery you get. I remember 2 particular examples in Moon. I don't want to spoil it for anyone. I'm sure there's a few people who haven't seen it, but
Tough.
There's a. No, you know what? That is too much. I can't actually say it. That's really unfair.
Okay.
It's okay. I'm not going to say it.
Well, Duncan,
there are some people who haven't seen the film.
I would love to know what the initial pitch was. This was your story, an original story that you had come up with. And when you were meeting with financiers or studios or whomever, what was your approach, and how did you put what the movie was that you wanted to make?
I mean, the making of the film is a story in its own right, and it was not traditional in that way. I'd come out of the commercials industry. I had a very lovely benefactor who was willing to help me out, Trevor Beatty, who basically gave us some seed money to kind of get things going. And then we were able to raise some money from a couple of other people, one of them being Trudy Styler, who is very known in the UK as being someone who supports independent British movies. She'd done Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels, and
great film,
kind of made
I did Filth with her as well.
Oh, really? Yeah. British independent films. She's always been kind of there to sort of support that.
Yeah.
So we were able to get about halfway to our budget through people like that. And then we did something that you really, really shouldn't do if you make movies. We started, with permission, spending the money as if we were making the movie.
Wow.
Hiring studio space, building sets, getting our contract with our actors, not having all the money for the film yet.
The train was going down the hill, and so people saw the momentum it was
people
taking.
saw a film getting made. So the kind of the tail that we needed fell into place, but not until 2 weeks after we started shooting the movie.
Can I interject here? This is what I remember you telling me at the time, and I may have. It's 10 years, and I may have changed this story over time. But
the fish was this big.
But I was really impressed with this, where you said to me, you kind of go, okay, we can get a certain amount of money. How can we maximise what we do? And you said, like, well, getting one actor for a start off, you know. And then you go, okay, we can build a set, and we have a different feature in 4 corners of one room. And I was really impressed by this sort of. That to me is like sort of. We got fuck all. How we're going to make it work? Yeah. And we're going to. And the weird thing is, like, I've always found parameters or limits ignite your imagination.
It was as a film, it was very strong on parameters. There were a lot of limitations we set for ourselves, and those that we would rather not have had, but had to have. Yeah. But they defined what the
and
what
that
the film
to me
was
is brilliant, because you
let's
have to
put on the
with
show.
It,
And the more you can't pay for, the more it requires your ingenuity.
I mean, when I did Pi, right? I mean, which was my first film, and I was living in New York, And I mean, it's 1997 at this point. I've got like an Atari computer, I've got an Akai sampler, and I've got a Nordlead
Half a bongo.
synth, right? You know, that's what I've got. Lightning strikes the building, the Nordlead's dead. So now I've got two pieces of equipment, and that sort of, like I say, that limitation. The scariest thing is like, do anything you want. You got to do anything you want. Fuck, I don't even know where to start. But those limitations are really, really defining for you and make you think within the box, if you like.
How do I get the best out of this?
Yeah, and that's when he said that to me, I thought, this is good. I know this is good because it's forcing you to think in a way that
Imagination over budget.
yeah, it is, you know, and it's special, I think, you know.
So Duncan, who were the people who inspired you in film? And how early did it start?
I mean, I was very, very fortunate. I had a very unusual, unique, even upbringing. Had the chance to be on some film sets when I was growing up. Had the chance to meet Jim Henson and be on sound stages where imagination was running wild, and incredible sets were being built. Whether it was Labyrinth when the sets for that were being built. Or was it Julian Temple who did Absolute Beginners,
Yes,
and they built the Soho in the London Soho in the 1950s set for that.
Greatly underrated movie, by the way.
Greatly
I love
underrated,
that
and
film.
also, I mean, especially for another British independent film, the amount of money and effort and artistry that went into the building of those sets, and then being very quite young and being able to walk on those and see the magic, of people's imagination being unleashed and teams of people bringing it to life. That just had huge impact on me. And as I said, music was never something which really kind of spoke to me in the same way that film did. And eventually, in a very convoluted way, I got to the time in my life where I realized that's what I wanted to do. And building sets and creating worlds from my imagination. That was really what inspired me, and filmmakers like Tony Scott, who I got the chance to work with briefly, when I was growing up, or work under, and those kind of people were really the ones who gave me the excitement and confidence that maybe I could do something like that.
Well, one thing I have to say is I met your dad a few times, and a couple times we talked about what he wanted to do more than anything else was make movies, to direct movies, and he never got the opportunity to fulfill that. And here you are completing this circle. It must feel fantastic.
It does. I mean, I know that Dad always was sort of dipping his toe in the water with acting, and had a serious resume by the end of it, and got the chance to work with a lot of incredible people along the way. So I think those experiences only added the fuel to the fire for him about hopefully getting the chance to do that one day. I mean, unfortunately, he passed away when he did, because you never know. Maybe he would have tried.
And I'm sure he would have been great. I mean, he did music videos and things, but
Yeah.
feature film would have been fantastic.
Yeah.
But you are able to carry on this legacy, and your films have dealt a lot with the imagination. They're not 100% earthbound in that they go into fantastical directions. Source Code, Warcraft, all of that. Is that by choice?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't know where the future will take me. Pardon the
Yeah,
pun.
I'll let you make the joke.
But I do feel like the humanity that exists in my films, if it exists, I think it does.
Well, it's obvious that it does.
I think it only works. I think audiences are willing to accept it in part because of the fantastical nature of the genres and the settings. So I think I can kind of wear my heart on my sleeve a little bit in my movies, and people kind of accept it, and the earnestness of it may be a little bit camouflaged by the genres that the films themselves are.
Well, you lay yourself bare when you make a film.
Yeah.
And in the case of Moon, it's your first movie. It's a relatively low budget. It's an independent film. There were some technically demanding things, especially when you're talking about replicating Sam Rockwell 2 or 3 times. Tell me about those what kind of research you did and how you handled those scenes, because you had to hold on to the humanity of it as you're doing something incredibly technical.
Well, I know. I mean, you were telling us earlier that you had the chance to do the podcast on Dead Ringers, and the Criterion Edition version of Dead Ringers had an amazing film school on how to have one actor playing multiple parts, and myself and Gary Shaw, who was my cinematographer, and Stuart Finnegan, my producer, we spent a lot of time going over those Criterion special features to see how they did that, and learned a lot. Then I also had the chance to talk to Spike Jonze, who had done adaptation with Nicolas Cage, and he gave me some really useful advice about, when you look at the script, choosing who is driving the scene and make sure that you shoot that part first, because obviously, it makes sense. It's common sense when you think about it, but to actually have that sort of laid out for you, the usefulness of that is really it's really clear. You want the person who's driving the scene to basically be shot first, and then whatever you do after that is a reaction to that person, the performance that drives the scene.
Well, tell me about the conversations you had with Sam Rockwell about that, because it has to be very demanding, even more demanding on the actor than on the director.
Yeah, well, when Sam finally agreed to do the film, I went across to New York where he was based, and he and myself and an actor friend of his, Yul Vasquez, got together, and we basically just workshopped the script for about 10 days, which again, for an independent film, is pretty unique. Yeah. But it made a huge difference. A lot of changes to just the nuance of who Sam's character was and the various Sams that he plays.
Because
how do we
not
differentiate
the same.
them? Yeah. How do we do that? And we really got into that during those rehearsal days. And we're able to start picking apart, okay, what makes these guys different? What do the 3 years of different experience that they've had do to them, and how does that come out in who they are?
I was also fascinated, there are miniatures in this movie, right?
Oh yeah.
And that is almost never the case anymore. And tell me about that, because these are Greg Jean style miniatures that you're working with here.
We had always planned to go the miniatures route, just for budget really, and the way we kind of thought about how we could get the best use out of it. And then something miraculous came and hit us. The writers' strike, which basically shut down the UK film industry at that time.
God.
And all of the top tier craftsmen at Shepperton and Pinewood and all these studios were available.
They were out of work.
They weren't working. All of the stuff that they were planning on doing had disappeared. So we were able to get some of the really top end people working in model miniatures. People who'd worked on Alien and who'd worked on these old movies, Bill Pearson and the team that he was used to working with, and they all came. We were able to get them on board and really punch way above our weight.
Oh, it looks amazing.
I remember you saying to me, which kind of blew my mind, that with those miniatures, there was like an algorithm that you could, you shoot it and then you slow it down to, and it sort of translates into weight.
Yeah, there's a very specific.
Amazing,
There's a very specific. There's a cinematographer that we had specifically for the miniatures shoot.
It's like 64 frames or 48 frames or something.
Yeah, he had a mathematical equation for working out not just to get the scale right, but also to take into consideration the gravity of the moon, so that the bounce and the speed of the bounce.
There are a lot of considerations.
There's a lot of math going on in there.
Now, Quint, when you're doing a science fiction film, but science fact fiction, very fact-based, what philosophically do you look for? What are there certain sounds? I mean, it's a very electronic score, and yet there's keyboard that goes melodic, and it has moods.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, we've talked about some of those sort of science fiction films that we grew up with, like Silent Running, which I was a huge fan of. But to be honest, that was almost like a secondary consideration really to the emotional aspect of the film and where it was going. And Sam, really, I mean, as a composer, you are really sort of, well, you should be, I think, led by what's going on the screen, and Sam Rockwell's performance, Sam Bell, really dictated everything that needed to happen, if you like. So there's obviously an element of confusion. I'm not sure quite what we're at in a good way. I mean, confusion in the film seems to scare people. I mean, but when I'm watching the film, I don't need to know everything that's going on. I understand that I'm probably going to find out.
Well, you're a
Eventually,
magician and you're
I'm-
misleading,
well,
intentional
you know,
misleading.
and that's part of the story, you know. But his performance really is nothing to do with science fiction, really.
Mm-hmm.
This is an emotion of a person who realizes that perhaps he's been cheated, and everything that he has got to know really is not what is true to him, you know. And that is the devastating core of the story. I mean, yeah, I mean, as I was saying earlier, I mean, Moon to me is a very political story too, you know, with the conditions that he's on the moon, he's doing this and whatever. But the core of it is really whether this guy is human or not. It's like, my God, this is a devastating situation to find yourself in. And that for me was what really was the central attraction to it, the humanity really. And then when you accept that, I'm kind of guided by Sam and Duncan as to where we can kind of let loose that stuff. And, you know, and to me, the most devastating shot in the movie is just when he looks and you see Earth in the distance, and it's fucking heartbreaking that you are so, not so close, but it's there, and there's no way you can reach
Well,
it.
melancholy seems to be the strongest element of this movie. So all of that emotional content, but you also put a lot of work into the reality of the science of it. How much research went into that when you were doing it?
There was, you know, early on when we were, you know, I'd kind of focused in on what I thought the film needed to be about. There was kind of some personal issues. I had a capitalist take on the space race, but all of the fiction of lunar industries, mining helium-3, how it would work, came from that book. Just kind of a very practical guide of how do you make money in space.
Wow.
And that really kind of just created Lunar Industries and what their business was, what Sam's job was, why would you save money when you could if you were a business, and how would you do it? So all of that kind of stuff came from that Robert Zubrin book.
What's your writing process? I know you co-wrote the script.
Yeah.
What is your process? Do you start in the
Yeah.
early day? Do you go all day? Do you skip times? Do you go back and forth? One of you types and the other one?
I mean, I would like to give a huge shout out to Nathan Parker here, who wrote the screenplay and wrote the first couple of drafts. I gave him I think a very solid blueprint through my treatment, but he was the one who delivered and I did my work with Sam Rockwell out in New York for the rehearsals and added my touches, but I want him to know I respect and love the work he did on it.
Yeah.
My process when I am writing, it's a very slow initial process, and it ramps up in speed. The more I know where I'm going, the faster I can go, and I think it's
the hardest part is like
it's the blank page.
Discovering what it's really about.
Yeah, and for me, I work with very, very specific beat points, and it will end up being maybe 4 or 5 pages of one line beats that just take me through almost every element of the story. Yeah.
Well, we need to wrap it up,
Yeah.
I'm being told. So, but I would love to know what you haven't done in film that you would love to do.
I've done 2 science fiction films in the future. I've done 1 science fiction film that was contemporary, and I've done a fantasy film. I do want to move out of those genres, maybe stay in genre, but different genres. So I think that's what I'd like to do.
Is there a genre in particular you'd like to dip your toe in?
Yeah, but I don't know if it's healthy for me to talk about it until I
Okay.
can find out if there's a way to do it.
Fair enough. And Clint, what about you? Is there anything musically that you have not done that you would love to attack? to bite into?
No, seriously, I'm ready to retire. Honestly, I know that's.
I'm dragging you back one more time.
I mean, I'd love
One last job.
Yeah. I'm happy to, because you never know what's going to come your way, But I'm finding it. I find the industry a little uninspiring at the moment. Not because of the work and stuff like that, the parameters that are now being, the way films are made. I would, if somebody or Duncan turned around and said, like, we got a $5 million movie, I'm on board.
Yeah.
Because I just want to be in a place where
No strings attached, no rules.
Absolutely,
We do it
yeah.
our way.
I don't, the only real ability I think I have is kind of what it is, and that doesn't flourish in mainstream film, and we need it to be this, we need that. I'm really excited by the unknown, and if it feels good, go with it. I find it quite hard in the current climate. Films like Requiem for a Dream, Moon, High Rise I did with Ben,
Hard to get those through a studio
it's
system.
very difficult, and I also feel that, to move things forward, to be creative, we kind of need to not be pressured into whether it's going to put bums on seats. I mean, obviously we all want to be successful in that.
Especially these seats.
Yeah,
They're
that's
the most comfortable looking. This is the only time I've done a Q&A where I've just been jealous to sit in your seats.
Well,
Maybe have the food too, because that looks pretty good as well.
well, it's great to have independent imaginations working independently and creating something like Moon. And I just want to congratulate you on this 10th anniversary of this very special film. And thank you, Duncan Jones, and thank you, Clint Mansell, for
Thank you.
joining us tonight.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.